Sushant, does it strike you as very unusual how Gurpatwant Singh Pannun has been allowed to, openly preach hatred against India and incite terror attacks? I mean, what's at play here? Who's backing Gurpatwant Singh Pannun?
Yeah, Sandeep, clearly there's something not quite right about how this whole thing is playing out. I can understand, dissident groups, holding demonstrations against India. That's par for the course. That kind of stuff happens out here also. We'll have the Tibetans demonstrate or the Tamilians demonstrate if a Sri Lankan leader is coming, which is okay, right? But what is happening in Canada and the US, even the UK for that matter, Australia, in fact, all the Five Eyes, if you will, is something kind of extraordinary. Because this is not just an ordinary protest which is taking place. They are actually making these blood-curdling calls for assassinations. They are actually taking action. They are defiling Hindu temples. If that's not hate speech, what is? They are threatening Indian diplomats, and yet you see absolutely no action from the governments and the authorities in these countries. Can you imagine, Sandeep, you or Aditya or I making a threat to an American Airlines that we are going to bomb it? Even
Absolutely.
if you mention a bomb in a different context while sitting in an aircraft, you will be deboarded and probably subjected to FBI interrogation. But here is a guy who publicly comes and says that the lives of Sikhs are going to be under threat on the 19th of November if they board an Air India aircraft.
Yeah.
Now, one could have dismissed this as the ravings and rantings of a lunatic, which clearly this man is. He is a lunatic. But the problem out here is that the group with which this lunatic is attached and that entire bunch of guys have had a track record of blowing airlines out of the air, right? They have had a track record of assassinations, of mass murders, of the most heinous and unspeakable crimes. And yet, you see the Americans, the Canadians, forget it, they are Pakistan, right? But you see the Americans, for example, being very blasé about it. And that leads me to the only possible conclusion that this guy is a paid agent of the American intelligence services, that he is their cat's paw, that he is somebody who they use to clear the pitch for India, to create some trouble, to put some pressure. Otherwise, it makes absolutely no sense the kind of impunity this guy enjoys in the US, in the American system, that nobody has put a finger on him, nobody has booked him for hate crime, nobody has booked him for issuing these threats, open threats, and everybody is so bothered about protecting his life under some alleged plot which was being hatched to assassinate this guy. Frankly, if somebody was to assassinate this guy, they would, reduce the burden of the earth. But on some alleged plot, the Americans are going into a funk. And yet, when it comes to taking action against this guy's utterances and his actions and his links with terrorists, gangsters, all kinds of other criminals, there's absolutely nothing happening. Leads you to ask a question, why?
Why, Aditya? Why are the Five Eyes blind to India's security concerns? And this is an issue that you've been following in the last couple of months. Why is it that, he's able to preach this kind of hatred and incite attacks and publicize lists of diplomats with their names and addresses?
And get away with it.
Exactly.
So clearly, Sandeep, this is nothing new. I mean, it has been reinvented in many ways in the last 2 years. But what we have witnessed is that over the last many decades, Khalistani groups have been using such tactics, particularly from US, Canada, UK and Australia. But also, these countries, the Five Eyes Sushant mentioned, have been using this to extend their foreign policy goals against India. Be it tactics or pressure tactics, be it strong arming India into some other, it could be defense deals, it could be anything else. But the point is that US, Canada in particular, has been doing this time and again. I mean, imagine the kind of threats that have been issued now. Not just about blowing up Air India, and threats particularly issued to the Sikh community based in India and Canada. And then going on to the extent of saying that the 13th December, the day the Indian Parliament was also attacked many years back, would be the day that yet again they will blow up the Indian Parliament. They will take strong action. Now, also, I need to mention here is that Gurpatwant Singh Pannun does not have any kind of a following either in India or Canada. He has a few hundred people here and there, radicals amongst the Sikh community who are supporting him in Canada as well as in US. They had attacked the Indian consulates both in Canada and US. But down in ground in Punjab or in all across the other states, there's massively no following. The only one person, Malkeet Singh, who was arrested recently, is an unemployed person from some interior village who he had called and told him that I'll pay you a few thousand rupees and you just need to actually paint graffitis across the national capital and a few other areas around the Indian Parliament. And that's what he did, and he was arrested. So it clearly signifies that there's no resonance of Khalistan in India. But continuously, the Pakistani deep state, along with the Canadian deep state, and perhaps now it's increasingly becoming clear that even the US, the CIA, the FBI have been using this, and perhaps their political masters are very much aware of the fact that Pannu is their own man and they're using him against India.
Sushant, I mean, do you buy this thing that he's actually a lone wolf and he can't really influence actions in India? Possibly he could do that overseas.
No, I don't. I don't buy it, and I disagree with my friend Aditya out here. Simply because, look, number one, you don't need to have a mass movement in your favor to create murder and mayhem in India. Even during the worst days of the so-called Khalistan movement in Punjab, how many people actually supported these lowlifes? At the mass level, there was never any great support for them. Maybe some hotheads, yes, but not a lot of people. And yet, what we saw was that there was an incentivization which was done, and a lot of criminals and others got involved in this whole thing, and then they took on that, that bore that veil of religiosity and went about their grisly task. But having said that, something very strange is happening. And this is why I don't agree with what Aditya is saying. Even in the 70s and 80s, when this whole Khalistan thing started bubbling up, and by the 80s it erupted, there were mistakes made within India, just as there are mistakes being made within India even today. And these are not mistakes of appeasement in many ways. But please look at how the SGPC and all these jathedars of the SGPC are responding to people who have been convicted of murder, people who have been convicted of assassination and who are on death row. Look at the kind of causes they espouse. Look at the kind of stuff that is being spoken about by these characters. Number one. Number two, have you ever seen the SGPC or some of these other characters come out openly against people like Pannu and others? No, you will not. And there's a reason for that. What the Canadians and what perhaps even the Americans and maybe the Brits are the slimiest of the lot. What some of these guys might be doing, which is what they did in the 70s and 80s, they incentivized this whole terror networks. And the reason was, India was seen as being part of the Soviet camp, number one. Number two, the Soviet, in the 80s, it really took off because the Soviets had moved into Afghanistan. There was this great Afghan jihad being fought, which ultimately led to bringing down of the Twin Towers, but that's another story. And the Americans and all of these other characters thought that India could actually make life difficult for Pakistan. So why not embroil India in its own troubles? And that is when you'll suddenly see a massive spike in the terrorism in Punjab. So India is unsettled, and I think there were Pakistani generals who said that we've occupied 2 Indian divisions in Kashmir, another few Indian divisions in Punjab. India is not in a position to wage any war against us. So please look at the larger context in which this whole thing is happening, even today. The other thing is that I think what they are doing is, the numbers might be small, 100, 200,000, maybe 2,000 people who actually identify with these guys. But how many people were there, Sandeep, in Indian Mujahideen? I don't think more than 100. Do you remember
Yeah.
what all mayhem they had wreaked, the amount of havoc they had wreaked in this country when they went on that bombing spree? You don't need a whole lot of people. And what do the Canadians do? They offer you the visa,
Yeah.
they offer you asylum. That's the name of the game. And I think one of the best things the government of India has done is thrown out these 40 odd Canadian diplomats. And I think maybe we need to start doing something similar with maybe the Americans and others, because this is a non negotiable thing. You
Right.
cannot want a strategic relationship with India at one level and then undermine India's strategic stability at another level,
Right.
India's domestic stability at another level. How does that play out?
Right.
What kind of friendship, what kind of partnership are we talking about if you are deliberately undermining my own stability, my domestic stability? You are questioning my territorial integrity and unity. You are sowing divisions in my country, and then you say we are strategic partners.
So
I
Aditya,
can't understand this.
you had this thing of the US court accusing India of an Indian national of planning to kill Pannun. In the very same week that top US officials were here for a 2+2 dialogue. So, do you think that this new case, this list of allegations that they've made that India has been trying to kill Pannun, that actually gives him a fresh lease of life to continue what he's doing?
Well, of course he does. You know, he's been operating from New York for a very long time. In fact, he has a dual citizenship of both Canada and US. He frequents both the countries to instigate, you know, these protests, violence in India. And apart from that, you know, yes, US has been using this, as I said, as pressure tactics. You know, we need to understand that this is an allegation that has been made.
Right.
There's no strong evidence that the US anyways has. Some drug trafficker or an arms dealer somewhere, you know, in Europe has been arrested, and allegedly he was in touch with some Indian agent. So they have some phone call that they've produced, but there's no chain. There's no, you know, money chain or link that has come out. There's no, you know, any other kind of evidence that has been presented by the US authorities. Ideally, this case should be over within the next 6 months and we'll know what happens to it.
Right.
I'm sure that diplomatic dialogue would be on, strategic dialogue would be on between these partners. But at the same time, I think the US will have to reflect and see which way they won't, and they will continue to in fact use this as a bargaining chip with India as a pressure tactic.
So, Sushant, we've been trying to get Pannun through Interpol, extradite him through Interpol, but every time we try and do that, Interpol says that he's a high-profile Sikh separatist, but his activities have a clear political dimension. You know, how long, what do we have to really do to get Pannun back, extradite him, or make sure he kind of, you know, shuts up?
You know, what we need to do to make him shut up is basically tell the Americans to shut him up. And I think the Americans will have all the goods on him to shut him up, and others of his ilk. But the problem is that, you know, organizations like Interpol and all, Sandeep, please forget Pannu, forget all these other characters, right? Please tell me, who has Interpol ever extradited back to India? Yeah? I don't remember. Kisko kiya? We've got people from the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
After their government started cooperating with us, not because of Interpol. Interpol is the most useless organization in the world.
It's the United Nations.
It's as useless as the United Nations.
That's right. I was just coming to that.
No, it's as useless as the United Nations. What has the United Nations ever solved, except if you get a job in the UN, you should never reject it, because it's fabulous. You roam around the world, you get a fabulous salary, no taxes, nothing. So it's a great job for people like Antonio Guterres or whatever that guy's name is. You can do all kinds of virtue signaling. You have no responsibility for anything. So it's a great life you have. But how does it affect anybody's life? Does the UN affect your and my life? It's a talking shop. They sit, they pass resolutions every day. Nobody listens to them anyways. So it's the same thing with Interpol. You made this nice fancy organization. Maybe some IPS officer will go on deputation out there. He'll have a good time for a couple of years. And that's it. Please tell me, how many people have they extradited to India? So, you know, it's the breakdown of the international, the idea is very good of the United Nations, of the Interpol, but it's the breakdown of the system, because the more powerful countries have always undermined these things and used them for their own ends. So, you know, depending upon them, you're not going to get anything.
Yeah,
But
you
I
know-
think you need to have a strong kind of a engagement with the Americans and tell them that, look, this is what we know. And just as the Americans are open to, coming out and filing cases in courts on some unnamed person, CC1, CC2, CC3, we can also do the same thing. We can talk about American, agents who have been working out here, or Canadian agents, or diplomats who've
Or
been
double
out here.
agents like David
Yeah,
Headley.
double agents who've been hobnobbing out here.
Yeah.
यार इस देश में केस फाइल करने में क्या लगता है मतलब कि anybody can file a FIR.
Right.
Today what I'm saying, somebody can go and file an FIR against me in some obscure corner of this country.
Right.
I'll be running around to Manipur or Mizoram or some place trying to defend, protect myself. So FIRs can be filed anywhere, charge sheets can be filed anywhere, cases can be filed anywhere, and let's do it. This is a game two can play. The Pakistanis tried some other games, we reciprocated. Now they've kind of started shutting up. So I think maybe even with these guys, we need to do this, that, if you try and spoil our reputation, we'll try and spoil yours.
Right. So
Is this the way you want to build a strategic partnership? I don't
Right.
think so.
News9 Plus. Download now.